Please be seated. Sitting is open. The court meets this afternoon to hear Azerbaijan present its single round of oral argument on the request for the indication of provisional measures submitted by the Republic of Armenia on 28 December 2022 in the case concerning application of the International Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination, Armenia versus Azerbaijan. I shall now give the floor to the agent of Azerbaijan, His Excellency, Mr. Elnur Mammadov. You have the floor, Excellency.
Madam President, honorable members of the court, it is an honor to appear before you on behalf of the Republic of Azerbaijan. Over the last several weeks, and again this morning, Armenia proclaimed that the peaceful protests held by Azerbaijanis on the Lachin Road are a blockade, even a siege, orchestrated by Azerbaijan, and deliberately aimed at harming the ethnic Armenians who use the road. On this basis, Armenia has accused Azerbaijan of the gravest of misconduct, making allegations of attempted ethnic cleansing. Azerbaijan rejects Armenia's baseless accusations in the strongest terms. Tragically, Armenia has seized upon the Lachin Road protests to try to create political leverage in the ongoing peace negotiations between the two states. And instead of trying to resolve issues, it encourages hatred and fear of Azerbaijan and Azerbaijanis. Azerbaijan will use its submissions today to correct the distortions about what is actually happening on the ground. Azerbaijan has confirmed before the United Nations and the OSCE and represents to the court today that it has not imposed any restrictions on traffic along the Lachin Road, nor could it. As I will explain in a moment, by virtue of paragraph 6 of the trilateral statement agreed between Azerbaijan, the Russian Federation, and Armenia in November 2020, the Lachin corridor is under the control of the Russian peacekeepers. The regime that applies to the Lachin Road is the same today as it was before the protests started. The protesters themselves have declared publicly and repeatedly that they had and continue to have no intention of blocking traffic. Indeed, every day dozens of cars and trucks pass by the protest site on Lachin Road. To date, more than 1,000 cars and trucks have passed. As I speak today, another 19 ICRC vehicles have just traveled from Karabakh to Armenia. There have been no reports of violence and no confrontations between the Azerbaijani protesters, individuals using the road to transit, and the Russian peacekeepers who control the road. When Azerbaijan, the Russian Federation, and Armenia were due to meet on December 23rd for another round of talks, including to address the situation around the Lachin Road, it was Armenia that pulled out of those discussions at the last minute without prior notice or explanation. Ever since, Armenia has declined all invitations to try and resolve the matter or to provide information that would enable others to do so. No plausible interpretation of these events could lead to the conclusion that Azerbaijan is purposely seeking to harm ethnic Armenians living in the Karabakh economic region of Azerbaijan, to which I will refer as Karabakh for short. Time and time again, Azerbaijan has made clear that while it criticizes the actions of the Armenian government, which deliberately aggravates the parties' dispute and refuses to abide by the trilateral statement, Azerbaijan's message for the Armenian people is one of reconciliation and of hope for a shared and peaceful future. You heard Armenia say this morning that Azerbaijan's president has called for the expulsion of ethnic Armenians from Karabakh. He was quoted multiple times as threatening, and I quote, "The road is open," end quote, for Armenians to leave. But this is just distortion, pure and simple. You see on the screen before you the full text of the statement that Armenia conveniently omitted this morning. Our president makes clear in the very same statement cited by Armenia this morning that ethnic Armenians are welcome citizens of Azerbaijan. Necessary conditions will be created for those who want to live there. Just like all the other citizens of Azerbaijan, their rights and security will be provided. And this is not the only time that Azerbaijan has expressed messages of peaceful coexistence. On the occasion of Easter celebrations in April 2021, our president again stated in relation to all citizens of Azerbaijan, and I quote, "The promotion of a culture of coexistence based on mutual respect and trust is one of the main priorities of Azerbaijan's state policy," end quote. In September last year, Azerbaijan's Minister of Foreign Affairs addressed the General Assembly of the United Nations and confirmed, and I quote, "Azerbaijan is resolute to reintegrate its citizens of Armenian origin into its political, social, economic space, guaranteeing the same rights and freedoms with all the citizens of Azerbaijan, regardless of their ethnic, religious, or any other affiliation," end quote. Azerbaijan stands by those words. As I'm speaking today, a group of Azerbaijani citizens concerned about the impact of illegal mining on their environment is standing on the side of the road near Shusha, holding placards and chanting slogans. For those old enough to remember, Karabakh used to be one of the most diverse, biologically rich parts of Azerbaijan. It is no longer, as environmental damage inflicted during Armenia's aggression and 30-year occupation is nothing short of staggering. As I'm speaking today, something else is happening not far from the protest site. Foreign companies, including Armenian ones, continue to mine Azerbaijan's land in order to export its resources to Armenia, leaving behind a trail of destruction, deforestation, toxic waste, and polluted rivers being just some of their legacy. In trying to convince the world that the protesters and the protests are not genuine, Armenia tries to suppress the fact that for nearly 30 years, it has been illegally exploiting the resource-rich territories of Azerbaijan that it invaded and occupied in violation of international law. These territories of Azerbaijan that Armenia occupied for nearly 30 years are unrecognizable today. Out of 151 mineral deposits in those territories, more than a third were exploited for the first time during occupation, and others were expanded. Azerbaijan has long sought to bring these issues to the attention of the international community. In its 2003 report to the United Nations Secretary General, for example, Azerbaijan highlighted the environmental damage caused by Armenia's operation in the then-occupied territories, including through illegal mining. Tragically, it became a common theme in Azerbaijan's subsequent reports. The full extent of the destruction became apparent only after Azerbaijan liberated its territories in November 2020. Most recently, last year, a mission of experts from the United Nations Environmental Programme visited the formerly occupied territories and discovered that mining and quarrying operations, including, in the words of the UN expert, and I quote, "some of the most aggressive and destructive forms of quarrying," end quote, had been conducted without due regard for the environmental impact. The mission described the assessment and monitoring of high-risk mining sites as, and I quote, "immediate priority," end quote. Just last week, Azerbaijan submitted its memorial in its case against Armenia, detailing the evidence of the environmental devastation caused by Armenia. Earlier this year, Azerbaijan also initiated proceedings against Armenia under the Convention on the Conservation of European Wildlife and Natural Habitats, also known as the Berne Convention, in order to hold Armenia accountable for the wholesale environmental devastation of the formerly occupied territories. In the last 2 years, in particular, the environmental devastation caused by Armenia's occupation has been at the forefront of the Azerbaijani public's minds. What is more, Armenia continues to exploit Karabakh's natural resources and inflict damage on its environment through illegal mining. For the last 2 years, Armenia used the Lachin corridor to traffic illegally mined minerals to Armenia. This was in addition to other serious violations of the trilateral statement, such as rotating military personnel through the corridor, and as will be addressed tomorrow, importing dangerous explosive devices which continue to kill and maim Azerbaijanis, and deny internally displaced Azerbaijanis its right to return to their homes. Madam President, honorable members of the court, this morning Armenia chose not to tell you the story of how the protests actually started. For well over a year, since November 2021, Azerbaijan has raised the issue of illegal mining and landmines, formally and informally, with the Russian peacekeeping forces temporarily deployed in these areas. Then in December last year, Azerbaijani representatives met with the Russian command, and it was agreed that a group of Azerbaijan's experts would conduct a monitoring visit to the 2 mines called Kızılbulag and Demirli in Karabakh on December 10th. When the experts arrived, they were prevented from accessing the sites by a group of local Armenians. 2 days later, on December 12th, peaceful protests started on a small section of the Lachin Road next to Shusha. It is against this background that I invite the court to judge someone's decision to stand outside in sub-zero temperatures and chant "Stop illegal mining" in front of a group of uniformed Russian soldiers guarding the road. The same road that was used by Armenian companies to remove truckloads of Azerbaijani's resources to Armenia. Following Armenia's submissions, it is important to set the record straight on two key points. First, what is the situation with the flow of traffic on the Lachin Road? And second, what is Azerbaijan's role in it? First, Armenia's claims of a protester-imposed blockade are simply false. This morning, we heard the accusations without any evidence. Azerbaijan's counsel will take you through the actual evidence, and I mean not just statements, but videos and photographs, showing that traffic is passing next to the protest site. There are no general statistics available about the volume of traffic on the road prior to the protests, as the Russian peacekeepers did not keep track of such information. However, in October 2021, they reported that they ensured the safe movement of about 200 vehicles during 1 week. Since the start of the protest, over 1,000 vehicles have passed there unimpeded. Most were large trucks carrying foodstuffs and other supplies. We know this because the protesters are keen to rebut the accusations of a blockade and show the world the truth. Daily, they record the comings and goings of cars and trucks on their phones, and journalists and camera crews are now also present on a daily basis. Armenia has not denied the reality of traffic passing the protest site this morning. Instead, it says that the fact that just Russian and ICRC vehicles are getting through proves that there is a blockade. But why is it that only Russian and ICRC vehicles come up to the protest site? It would be useful at this point to look at the map, which is now on screen and is also in the slide deck in your folders at tab 1. The map shows the Lachin Road, which starts at the Armenian-Azerbaijan border at the bottom and goes north to Khankandi. As I have already noted, since November 2020, the road is under the control of the Russian peacekeepers. The map shows Russian checkpoints on the Lachin Road, based on maps published daily by the Russian command. The protest site is located right next to checkpoint 7, which is the only accessible point for Azerbaijanis, as it can be reached from Shusha. You can see that before the protest site, there are 50 kilometers of road and several Russian checkpoints when coming from Armenia. From Khankandi in the north, there are 13 kilometers of road and at least one Russian checkpoint before the protest site. Azerbaijan does not have any presence in those areas, and it is not aware of how traffic there is being regulated by the Russian peacekeepers. Armenian authorities falsely accuse the Azerbaijani protesters of violence and Azerbaijan of attempted ethnic cleansing, distorting the reality deliberately to create an atmosphere of fear and hatred of the protesters within the ethnic Armenian community in Karabakh. On that basis, Armenia and its installed regime in Karabakh broadcast statements and information to convince the local population that the Lachin road is closed even if they are hearing otherwise, and that they should not be afraid to use the road because of the purported danger posed by Azerbaijani protesters. Armenia is deliberately fanning the flames of anti-Azerbaijani fear and hatred. In its statements, Armenia insisted that the protesters acted as, and I quote, terrorists, end quote, quote, invaded, end quote, a bus wearing masks and subjected children to, quote, psychological terror, end quote. This is just unsupported. What is clear from the videos that appear online daily is that traffic that does reach the protest site is able to pass next to it, and that the protesters, most of them youth of Azerbaijan, are peaceful. This is a key point. To Azerbaijan's knowledge, every car, truck, or person who approached the protest site, regardless of identity, was able to pass that section of the road. As I have said, this is consistent with the statements issued by the protesters that they have no intention of blocking traffic. A video taken on 8 January shows a local Armenian safely passing the protest site on the way back to Khankandi. And on 17 January, 26 Armenians, including 20 teenagers, safely returned from Armenia to Khankandi along the Lachin road, again passing the protesters on their way. These are facts that can be readily verified and show categorically that Armenia's claims of a blockade as a result of the actions of Azerbaijan or the protesters are false, as are Armenia's claims of the protesters posing a threat to passing traffic. Azerbaijan has been monitoring news and other footage of the protest site daily, and if there were credible evidence that the protesters engage in harassment, Azerbaijan would take steps within its jurisdiction to investigate the incident under its domestic law, which prohibits such acts, including by protesters. But there is none. Armenia's rhetoric before the court and in other public fora is just another example of Armenia's attempt to portray every encounter with an Azerbaijani as a threat, instilling fear in people from an early age. It is precisely this fear-mongering, both from Armenia and those who purport to speak for the local residents in Karabakh, that is used to perpetuate the cycle of hatred against Azerbaijanis. Now, the second point I will address is Azerbaijan's role in the Lachin corridor and its efforts to help facilitate the resolution of the dispute. As I have already stated, under the terms of the trilateral statement, the Lachin corridor is temporarily under the control of the Russian peacekeepers. In practice, that means that Azerbaijan is not exercising control there. Contrary to Armenia's speculation, Azerbaijan is not orchestrating the protests. They started as, and continue to be, a civil society initiative organized by domestic NGOs. Azerbaijan categorically rejects any accusation that it is sending people to the protests or directing their conduct. In the absence of actual evidence, Armenia speculates about various, quote, links, end quote, between the government and the protesters. For example, Armenia's claim that some of the participating NGOs receive state funding is a distraction, Why? It is very common for NGOs everywhere to receive state funding, and Azerbaijan is no exception, with 4,000 NGOs active in my country. The provision of state funding is regulated by the law and done in an open and transparent manner, which is why it was not difficult for Armenia to find that information. But the NGOs remain independent in their activities, including in their decision to join the Lachin Road protests. Armenia also displayed photographs selectively pulled from social media accounts of some of the protesters in the past, not during the protests, wearing Azerbaijani military uniforms. In Azerbaijan, where military service is compulsory, such photos are not hard to come by for many young citizens. They in no way indicate that the individual is a current member of the armed forces, much less that the individual has joined the Lachin Road protest on behalf or on the instruction of Azerbaijan. Armenia also says that the protesters had to receive a quote, special permission from the government, end quote, to attend the protests. It is correct that the Azerbaijani protesters needed to register with Azerbaijani authorities to be able to travel through the liberated territories and enter the city of Shusha, which is closest to the protest site. This is required as a matter of safety, because these regions are heavily contaminated with landmines laid by Armenia during its 30-year occupation. The requirement applies to every person wishing to travel to the liberated territories and is not specific to the protesters. In the last 2 years, experts, foreign delegations, and Azerbaijani officials have gone through that same process. Azerbaijan has submitted a sample of the NGO's request letters into evidence. Azerbaijan had no reason to deny the NGOs access to Shusha. But once the protesters get to Shusha, Azerbaijan plays no role in letting them onto the Lachin Road itself, which is separated from Shusha by a fence and access point controlled by Russian peacekeepers. To be clear, Azerbaijan supports the message and objectives of the protests, and it has always been open about that, but it is not orchestrating them. Throughout the protests, Azerbaijan has been fulfilling its obligations under the trilateral statement with respect to transit along the Lachin Road. Azerbaijan continues to guarantee the safety of movement actually taking place along the corridor. Even though the protesters gave assurances that they had no intention of blocking civilian traffic, Azerbaijan has taken seriously the possible negative impact of the situation on Armenians living in Karabakh, who enjoy the same rights as Azerbaijani citizens. From the outset, on December 22nd, Azerbaijan met with the representatives of the International Committee of the Red Cross, I will refer to as ICRC, which has been operating in the Karabakh region since the early 1990s. At the meeting, Azerbaijan confirmed its readiness to provide every assistance to the local residents, either directly or through the ICRC. There has been ongoing communication with the ICRC since. Azerbaijan has repeated its offer of assistance throughout the protests, and its actions reflect its words. The Russian foreign minister confirmed on January 18th that the Russian peacekeepers facilitated a meeting between Azerbaijani representatives and the local Karabakh residents. This is a continuation of successful dialogue with local Armenians that has been ongoing since 2020, including on issues such as the construction of a bypass road in the Lachin corridor, as envisaged by the trilateral statement, and the management of the Sarsang water reservoir. Azerbaijan is committed to maintaining dialogue on any issues which are of concern to the local residents. Consistent with Azerbaijan's obligations under the trilateral statement, Azerbaijan also is complying and will continue to comply with the 21st December 2022 order of the European Court of Human Rights to take measures within its jurisdiction to ensure the safe passage through the corridor of seriously ill persons and others who were stranded on the Lachin Road without shelter or means of subsistence. Meanwhile, Armenia's approach could not have been more different. 10 days into the protests, on December 23rd, Armenia pulled out of trilateral talks in Moscow at the last minute. Those talks were intended to address, among other matters, the Lachin road protests as well as the continuing problem of Armenia using the road to illegally transport military equipment such as landmines and booby traps into Azerbaijan, which you will hear more about tomorrow. Armenia pulled out of the talks abruptly and without prior notice. Russia and Azerbaijan learned of Armenia's decision to drop out from Armenia's press release after the fact. Since then, Armenia has declined multiple invitations from the Russian Federation and Azerbaijan on December 23rd, on January 12th, and January 17th, to name a few, to meet to resolve the situation. Armenia has also refused to engage with the Russian peacekeepers to facilitate the delivery of supplies to Karabakh. On January 12th, Azerbaijan, in its letter to the court, called on Armenia to provide information about food, medicine, and other supplies that need to be delivered to the local residents, or any transfers of persons that require assistance, so that Azerbaijan can at least take up these matters bilaterally with the Russian peacekeepers. Armenia, again, has remained silent. Despite coming to the court for relief in mid-January, Armenia's Prime Minister and the Speaker of the National Assembly inexplicably declared that, and I quote, "Armenia will not participate in any negotiations with Azerbaijan regarding the opening of the Lachin corridor," end quote. And it is the self-proclaimed so-called officials in Karabakh who should negotiate directly with Azerbaijan. Since that is Armenia's view, Madam President and members of the court, why are we even here? Why has Armenia seized the court with allegations which, in Armenia's own words, do not concern it? This is not the conduct of a state serious about resolving the situation. It is a state driven by its own political agenda. It is a state serious only about using every opportunity to broadcast on every international platform, including now the court, its baseless allegation that Azerbaijan has orchestrated a siege of Karabakh. I will now make one final point on Armenia's distortion of facts before I conclude. On the last business day before this hearing, Armenia submitted an entirely new request for provisional measures concerning an entirely unsubstantiated allegation that Azerbaijan is deliberately disrupting the gas supply to Karabakh. The court has noted that Azerbaijan has not had an adequate opportunity to respond to these latest accusations, and Azerbaijan welcomes the opportunity to do so in due course. But for now, let me just say this. First, it is Armenia that supplies gas to Karabakh, not Azerbaijan. Azerbaijan's only involvement is that a portion of the pipeline runs through Azerbaijani's territory. Second, interruptions of gas supply are not uncommon in winter months and are not specific to Karabakh. They also affect other parts of Azerbaijan's territory and indeed Armenia's own network. Whenever the root cause required Azerbaijan's engineers to act to restore supply, they did so. In each case, repairs were made on an urgent basis and supply was restored as quickly as possible. There is a clear pattern where, as soon as a gas disruption occurs, Armenia accuses Azerbaijan of deliberate sabotage without any evidence. And even if Azerbaijanis in other parts of Azerbaijan are experiencing disruptions at the same time, as was the case in December 2022, there is no basis whatsoever for Armenia's assertion that these are deliberate acts of racial discrimination by Azerbaijan targeting the residents of Karabakh. This is just wrong. Azerbaijan cannot take steps for which it is not responsible. It is Armenia that supplies the gas to Karabakh, but for its part, Azerbaijan can represent that it has not and does not intend to disrupt gas supplies or the provision of other public utilities to Karabakh. It is telling that each of Armenia's baseless accusations against Azerbaijan is accompanied by a flurry of activity on the international stage. Armenia uses every opportunity to declare an impending humanitarian crisis and call on the global community to urgently act against Azerbaijan. In this instance, it has come to the court to demand the court's intervention, but is unwilling to take any steps itself to actually resolve the issue. Instead, Armenia inflames tensions by falsely accusing Azerbaijan of attempted ethnic cleansing without basis. Azerbaijan objects in the strongest terms to Armenia's tactics and its use of such rhetoric, which is offensive, dangerous, and aggravates the dispute in violation of the court's December 7, 2021 order in Azerbaijan's case against Armenia. On behalf of Azerbaijan, I urge the court to carefully look at the actual evidence before it and judge the parties by their actions rather than Armenia's empty words, no matter how many times Armenia tries to amplify its allegations in various political fora. Madam President, honorable members of the court, Azerbaijan has and undertakes to continue to take all steps within its power to guarantee the safety of movement of persons, vehicles and cargo along the Lachin Road, including continued and regular engagement with the ICRC, communicating with and facilitating communications with Russian peacekeepers, taking steps to engage with the local residents in Karabakh, and if Armenia finally decides that it is indeed its problem and agrees to come to the negotiating table, then with Armenia as well. Azerbaijan's distinguished counsel will now address the court and explain why Armenia's application should be dismissed. First, Mr. Van Loo will discuss the factual and legal regime of the Lachin Corridor and Azerbaijan's role in it. Second, Lord Peter Goldsmith will address the lack of plausible rights and urgency. And third, Professor Laurence Boisson de Chazourne will conclude on behalf of Azerbaijan and explain why an order of provisional measures against Azerbaijan is not only unwarranted, but would also be inappropriate. I will then return briefly for concluding submissions. Thank you, Madam President and honorable members of the court, for the privilege of appearing before you. I now kindly ask you to, Madam President, invite Mr. Loo to address this court.
I thank the agent of Azerbaijan for his statement, and I now invite Mr. Van Loo to take the floor. You have the floor, sir.
Lower the lectern a bit. Thanks. Madam President, members of the court, it is a privilege to appear before you and an honour to have been entrusted with the presentation of this part of Azerbaijan's case. Armenia's request rests on the proposition that, quote, on the 12th of December 2022, Azerbaijan orchestrated a blockade of the only road connecting the 120,000 ethnic Armenians in Nagorno-Karabakh with the outside world, thereby preventing anyone and anything from entering or exiting, close quote. This is not borne out by the evidence. As the agent explained, there is no blockade. Azerbaijan is not orchestrating the protests, and, as I will explain, the practical ability to control access to the Lachin corridor rests in the hands of others. Armenia's request then presents a mixture of actual and hypothetical consequences of this alleged blockade, ranging from abusive Twitter messages to genocide. Armenia is presenting the court with a grossly distorted and misleading picture of the situation, and there are three main misimpressions to correct. The first is that the protesters are not true environmental protesters. Certainly, there has been a demonstration by Azerbaijani protesters at one point on the side of the Lachin Road since the 12th of December 2022. These individuals are engaged in a peaceful objection to the continued pillaging of Azerbaijan's natural resources by Armenia under the very eyes of the peacekeeping force. And there is extensive evidence documenting the origins of the protest and the engagement of civil society. On the 9th of December 2022, a group of 23 NGOs issued an appeal to the Russian peacekeeping forces to allow representatives of environmental NGOs to access the mining sites. On the 10th of December, when an inspection of the sites by Azerbaijan's representatives was prevented by local Armenians, NGOs in Azerbaijan decided to organize a protest. As can be seen in Annex 14 to our request, the NGOs informed the Azerbaijani authorities of their wish to enter the liberated territories in order to demonstrate and to travel to Shusha, which is the only access point for Azerbaijanis onto the Lachin Road. At tab 8 of your folders, you will find a sample of statements and social media posts issued by the participants in the protests, showing how they organised themselves and discussing their concerns and reporting from the protest site. No doubt some of them are demonstrating as much against Armenia's environmentally ruinous open-cast mining of minerals in Azerbaijan, which are taken from Azerbaijan to Armenia along the Lachin Road, as they are for other ecological reasons. And why should they not? Making the protesters' views known is the whole point of peaceful protests, whether they be trades union pickets or ecological activists or political opponents. They are there to make known their belief that there is something wrong that must not be forgotten or ignored or brushed under the carpet. Anger at such unlawful exploitation of their homeland, if it were paintings or works of art that were being taken, we'd call it plunder, is surely an understandable and a legitimate subject for protest. To correct a second misimpression, our agent has confirmed to the court that Azerbaijan did not orchestrate the protests. There is no indication in the evidence that these are state-run protests. They are protests like hundreds of other environmental protests around the world. And as Professor Boisson de Chazourne will explain, Azerbaijan would contravene its domestic and international obligations if it were to suppress this peaceful protest. The protesters are not blockading anyone, let alone specifically blockading Armenians. Their focus is on the illegal exploitation of natural resources and their removal from Azerbaijan along the Lachin Road. It is not concerned with race or ethnicity of those using the road. Statements issued by the protesters themselves make clear that traffic will be let through. And, as will be explained by Lord Goldsmith, photographs and video evidence show the full extent of the protesters' presence. So, yes, there was a protest on the Lachin Road on the 12th of December, and there have been some protesters there each day since. And yes, no doubt protesters do make clear their views about the exportation to Armenia of plundered Azerbaijani resources carried by vehicles transiting the Lachin Road. But it is a peaceful protest. There have been no reports of violence and nothing that warrants an order from the world's highest court to close down that protest. To correct a third misimpression, a key element of Azerbaijan's case is that, as a matter of fact and as a matter of law, it is the Russian peacekeepers and not Azerbaijan who are regulating the traffic along the Lachin Road. The November 2020 trilateral statement installed a peacekeeping contingent for a 5-year period and provided in paragraph 6 that the Lachin corridor, quote, shall remain under the control of the Russian Federation's peacekeeping contingent, end quote. It was specifically agreed between Armenia, Azerbaijan and Russia that Azerbaijan would not have control over the Lachin corridor. And this was not in question during the 2 years after November 2020, until Armenia began to accuse Azerbaijan of mounting a blockade. As the agent explained, the protests are taking place next to the Russian checkpoint 7, which you can see on the slide. And that is because it is close to Shusha. But the road is over 60 kilometers long and has several Russian checkpoints before and after the protest site. For instance, this is a photograph taken by a local photographer living in Karkandi, showing peacekeepers guarding the road leading towards the protest site, which is more than 10 kilometers from the place where this photograph was taken. I invite the court to look at our Annex 24 in tab 2 of your folders, which is a transcript of a video taken on the 26th of December 2022 of an Armenian citizen explaining that he was unable to travel along the Lachin road from Armenia to Karkandi because of the peacekeepers. And you'll see also Annex 25 at tab 3 of your folders, which is a transcript of a conversation between a local Armenian resident of Karabakh and a member of the peacekeeping force in Karkandi, posted on social media on the 23rd of December 2022. The transcripts demonstrate that the peacekeepers are present and are exercising authority and control over the road, and that Armenian citizens are displeased with the state of affairs. All parties to the trilateral statement have acknowledged the reality of control by the Russian peacekeepers. Armenia is well aware of the situation. On the 14th of December 2022, just 2 days after the start of the protests, its own parliament specifically called on the Russian Federation to unblock the road. You can see the parliament statement on the screen. Russia itself, during a UN Security Council debate on the 20th of December 2022, confirmed that, I quote, the Lachin corridor is under the control of the Russian Federation peacemaking force, end quote. So let me take you to the trilateral statement, part of which is now on the screen in English and in its Russian original. Russia controls the Lachin corridor. And what precisely was it that Azerbaijan and Armenia agreed, in paragraph 6 of the trilateral statement, should be guaranteed by Azerbaijan to citizens, vehicles and goods travelling along the Lachin road in both directions? It was the safety, in Azerbaijan's English translation of the statement, safe movement in Armenia's translation, and security in Russia's translation, of persons, vehicles and cargo moving along the Lachin road. But in its request for provisional measures, it is, quote, uninterrupted free movement, end quote, along the Lachin corridor that Armenia claims. Well, the difference is obvious. If Armenia is demanding that those travelling along the corridor be shielded from the demonstration of the views of the protesters, that is not what was agreed. Nor is it something that Armenia can properly demand. Armenia is bound by the European Convention on Human Rights to secure the freedom of expression without interference by public authority, unrestricted except as necessary in a democratic society. And when Armenia took the question of the Lachin corridor to the European Court of Human Rights last month, that court decided, without a hearing, the matter was decided on the papers, only to indicate that Azerbaijan should take all measures to, quote, ensure safe passage, end quote. The European Court accurately reflected paragraph 6 of the trilateral statement, and its reference in the European Court's translation to the guarantee of the security of persons, vehicles and cargo moving along the Lachin corridor. But just consider that phrase, the security, the safety of persons, vehicles and goods moving along the Lachin corridor, in the context of the trilateral statement and in the light of its object and purpose. As you can see on the slide, the trilateral statement explicitly provided that the Lachin corridor shall remain under the control of the Russian Federation's peacekeeping contingent. Can Azerbaijan be understood to have guaranteed exactly what the Russian peacekeeping contingent, which of course remains under Russian military command, will do hour by hour and day by day? Plainly not. Azerbaijan cannot and cannot have been expected to guarantee something over which it has no control. It would be absurd to expect that. The only plausible meaning is that Azerbaijan will absolutely not do anything itself to endanger the safety of traffic moving along the Lachin road, and that it will take reasonable steps within its powers to stop others endangering the safety of traffic there. Azerbaijan has done nothing to endanger traffic, nor have the protesters. All goods have passed along the Lachin road safely. There is nothing more that Azerbaijan can do to control and secure traffic along the Lachin road. The Russian peacekeeping force is not only present in the corridor, it controls the corridor. Well, of course, Azerbaijan can speak to those who command the Russian peacekeeping force, and it has done so, and it will continue to do so. But so can Armenia. Armenia is as much a party to the trilateral statement as Azerbaijan. If it has genuine concerns about the situation on the ground, it can raise them with those whom it agreed should control the situation on the ground, and who are in fact controlling the situation on the ground. But instead, Armenia fails to attend meetings and pursues this request against the very state that it specifically wanted not to control the situation on the ground, and that does not, and under the trilateral statement, cannot control the situation on the ground. The truth is that there is simply no factual basis for Armenia's suggestion that Azerbaijan is failing in its duties in relation to traffic along the Lachin road, and that is my first point. There are two other short points in my submission, both of which are legal rather than factual. The first of the two is that the court has no occasion to make the order that Armenia requests. Statements made by an authorised agent of a state before the court are binding on the state. The commitments made by Azerbaijan through its agent to the court have already resulted in a legal obligation created within the context of these proceedings, binding Azerbaijan to observe commitments that are at issue in Armenia's request. To recall those commitments, the agent said, quote, Azerbaijan has and undertakes to continue to take all steps within its power to guarantee the safety of movement of persons, vehicles and cargo along the Lachin Road, end quote. And that it is ready to, quote, provide every assistance to local residents either directly or through the ICRC, end quote. And the agent also confirmed that, of course, Azerbaijan will do its best to prevent the cutting off of gas and electricity supplies to those in Nagorno-Karabakh, just as it does for consumers in all other parts of its territory. The court may wish to record those commitments, but the commitments have removed the necessity for the making of an order repeating their terms. The third task in my submission is to draw the court's attention to a legal issue that the court might yet have to address, which has implications for any order it might be minded to make. At this stage, the court need only satisfy itself that it has prima facie jurisdiction, that the measures requested are plausible and linked to the rights to be protected in the case, that the measures are necessary to prevent the aggravation or extension of the dispute or to avoid irreparable prejudice to rights which are the subject of dispute, and that the need for the measures is urgent. But there is a significant legal complication arising from the fact that by virtue of the trilateral statement signed by Armenia, Azerbaijan and Russia, the Lachin corridor was and continues to be under the de facto and de jure control of the Russian peacekeeping force. This is not a situation of the kind envisaged by Article 6 of the ILC Articles on State Responsibility, where an organ of one state, Russia, has been placed at the disposal of another state, Azerbaijan, to exercise elements of the governmental authority of the latter state. As the ILC made clear in paragraph 2 of its commentary on Article 6, to fall within that provision, the organ must act in conjunction with the machinery of the other state and under its exclusive direction and control, rather than on instructions from the sending state. The Russian peacekeeping force is not under the exclusive direction and control of Azerbaijan. In fact, it's not under Azerbaijan's direction or control in any way whatsoever. It is an independent force operating under the direction of the Russian government. Singling out Azerbaijan, the party to the trilateral statement whose control over the Lachin corridor was deliberately and specifically displaced by the statement for the purposes of the ceasefire agreement, makes no sense, and it disrupts the careful balance struck in that agreement and would risk aggravating an already tense situation. It is clear that the request from Armenia is both hasty and misjudged. The Lachin corridor remains open, and an order against Azerbaijan is neither necessary nor properly framed as a matter of law. Before I close, please allow me to make one more general point. The submissions this morning combine some fine rhetoric with an almost complete lack of supporting evidence. There's not time to rebut all of the points, the alleged threat to shoot down aircraft, the assumption that anyone wearing a military-style jacket must be an agent of the state, and so on. So let me go straight to the point at the heart of Armenia's request. Professor Danjean said that Armenia does not ask that Azerbaijan disperse the protesters, but only that it cease supporting them. He recognised that Azerbaijan does not control the Lachin Road and said that all that Armenia asks is that Azerbaijan ceases orchestration of the protest and stops its logistical and financial support for it. But where is the evidence of that orchestration or of financial or logistical support? If the court were to base an order on those assertions, what would it point to as proof of those assertions? Armenia has had 4 weeks since it filed its request to gather video footage and photographic evidence of the alleged blockade in operation. Where is it? Where is that evidence? It's had 50 days to gather evidence of Azerbaijan's alleged orchestration. Where is it? Armenia's main request rests on a bare factual assertion which Azerbaijan flatly rejects. And Armenia has produced no evidence to substantiate that assertion. Madam President, that concludes my part of the submission on behalf of Azerbaijan in this case. I thank the Court for its attention and ask that you would now invite Lord Goldsmith to the lectern.
I thank Mr. Lowe, and I now invite Lord Goldsmith to address the Court. You have the floor.
Madam President, honourable members of the Court, it's my honour to continue the submissions on behalf of the Republic of Azerbaijan and do so before you. The agent has already outlined for the Court what the situation actually looks like on the road, and I will further build on that. I'm going to address 2 points. First, I will show that the environmental protests are not acts of racial discrimination, which is a threshold matter, meaning that absent a plausible case of racial discrimination, the Court cannot issue provisional measures. Secondly, I will address urgency and necessity. I will show that Armenia has sought to create a narrative of urgency because it suits its interests. But heightened rhetoric does not reflect reality. In fact, Armenia's conduct during the period of the protests is the best evidence of that. It goes beyond mere complacency. It is an outright refusal to engage. In these circumstances, it's not proper for Armenia to demand that the Court urgently intervene. I turn to the threshold issue. Is there a plausible case of racial discrimination such that the Surd may be implicated? The answer is no, there is not. The acts we are talking about are Azerbaijanis exercising their right to peaceful protest and assembly. And unless those protests can be characterized as racial discrimination under Article 1 of the Convention, amounting to a distinction based on ethnic or national origin, that at the same time has the purpose or effect of impairing protected rights, Armenia has no case for provisional measures. As you've already heard, the protesters are overwhelmingly representatives of civil society organizations in Azerbaijan. In fact, that's also accepted by Armenia. In fact, no fewer than 102 non-governmental organizations have participated in the protest. And the slide on the screen shown now shows what it looks like day by day on the protest site. These are generally young people holding signs such as Stop Ecocide, Stop Illegal Mining, and expressing their real concern about the ecological damage caused by the continued illegal plundering of their country's natural resources. And this is the reason they're here. During the decades-long occupation of Azerbaijan's territory, Armenia illegally mined and exported Azerbaijan's natural resources, including gold, copper, and other valuable minerals. On this slide, you see the impact of mining at the Demirli mine, which the Armenian company Base Metals started to develop in 2012. On the left is the landscape as it looked before the mining started. By 2021, you can see on the right there is an open-pit mine on the western side of the satellite image and a large tailings dam and sediment ponds in the east. There is substantial deforestation and no apparent revegetation to minimize the environmental impact of the mine. Armenia continued these illegal practices after the signing of the trilateral statement in November 2020. Although apparently opportunely 2 days after Armenia filed its provisional measures request to you, it announced that it would, and I quote, apply to international organizations to conduct an international environmental review, close quotes, of base metals operations. Though contrary to Armenia's assertion this morning, there was no offer of access for Azerbaijan. As the agent explained earlier, the companies that Armenia brought in to operate the mines were notorious for their lack of environmental standards. A group of experts from the United Nations Environment Programme, UNEP, conducted a field visit to the formerly occupied territories in 2022 and observed that, and I quote, mining development has had one of the largest physical footprints in the region's environment, close quotes. You can see some of UNEP's key findings on the slide, and you have an excerpt in your folder at tab 4. UNEP found, and I quote, that mining and quarrying operations had been generally conducted with inadequate environmental oversight and supervision, close quotes, leading to deforestation and water and soil pollution, among others. The companies used in-stream quarrying, which UNEP described as, again I quote, one of the most aggressive and destructive forms of quarrying, close quotes. This morning, Armenia called these serious concerns, again the language was, wholly fictitious, close quotes, and an environmental fairy tale, close quotes. In fact, local Armenians have themselves in the past protested against the inadequate environmental standards at the Soyutlu mine, which is still under Armenian occupation. The environmental devastation in the liberated territories is so widespread that Azerbaijan has now launched interstate proceedings against Armenia under the Convention on the Conservation of European Wildlife and Natural Habitats. It's therefore not surprising that Azerbaijanis are concerned with the state of the environment in Karabakh and wish to do something. As our agent explained earlier, these concerns are not new. They have been consistently raised by Azerbaijan since at least 2003 in various international fora. After November 2020, Azerbaijan continued to press the issue with the Russian peacekeepers, who are temporarily stationed, as the court knows, in this part of the Karabakh region, asking them to take urgent measures to stop the illegal mining, as well as the trafficking of Azerbaijan's natural resources to Armenia through the Lachin corridor. Despite this, the issue has not abated. Eventually, on December the 10th, 2022, a group of Azerbaijani experts arrived to conduct an agreed monitoring visit in the Demirli and Gizilbulag mines in Karabakh. However, they were prevented from accessing the sites by a group of local Armenians, as Russia's foreign minister confirmed, and I quote, through no fault of Azerbaijan or the Russian peacekeepers, close quotes. Azerbaijan raised the failed inspection with the Russian peacekeepers in a note verbal on 11th of December, which you can find in your folders at tab 6. The failure of a pre-agreed monitoring visit after more than a year of negotiations understandably caused widespread discontent among Azerbaijanis. 2 days later, on the 12th December, a group of Azerbaijani NGOs started a protest at a Russian checkpoint on the Lachin Road, close to the city of Shusha. They wanted to voice their concerns, their demands to the Russian peacekeepers who policed the use of that road as an end the illegal exploitation of mines in Karabakh and access for Azerbaijani experts to monitor active mine sites. I've shown you photographs from the protests earlier, and a compilation is included in your folders at tab 7. Also in your folders at tab 8 is a compilation of statements, reports and social media posts by the participants in the protests. This is what you would expect to see from people who are concerned about a public issue and wish to have their voices heard. Madam President, honourable members of the Court, Armenia doesn't get to decide who has a right to protest or about what, or who can call themselves an eco-activist, or as it tried to do this morning. That is entirely the individual's decision, guaranteed under international law. The question before the Court is this: is there a plausible case that these protests constitute racial discrimination under the CERD? There is not. The protests have neither the purpose nor the effect of impairing protected rights based on ethnic or national origin. As for purpose, as I've just explained, there is ample evidence that these are genuine environmental protests, not unlike many which regularly take place around the world. The protesters' actions are aimed at the companies operating the mines and at the Russian peacekeepers, who the protesters say should enforce stricter checks on the Lachin Road so that Azerbaijan's natural resources cannot be shipped off to Armenia. The protests do not target the people living in Karabakh and have nothing to do with their ethnicity. Yet earlier today, Armenia ignored all this evidence and selectively cherry-picked social media posts, which it says shows that some individual protesters are connected to extremist groups. But I respectfully urge the Court to carefully examine the evidence for Armenia's statements, because very few are supported by any evidence. Armenia, for example, referred to 2 videos. For one, there is no indication that it relates to the protests. Armenia referred to a social media post by someone allegedly attending the protests that they say shows hate speech. That post was from August 2022 and not connected to the protests. Armenia also referred to people wearing military uniforms in old photographs, again without any demonstrated connection to the protests. But as the agent explained, in a country with compulsory military service, that means very little. In fact, it's conspicuous that Armenia has not even alleged this morning, let alone presented evidence for there being any form of violence at the protests themselves. Even if Armenia were to identify individual instances of certain gestures being used by some of the protesters in one photo, that is a distraction. It is unfortunate but not uncommon that legitimate protests, especially when they bear upon politically charged issues, such as Armenia's 30-year occupation of Karabakh, also attract individuals with mixed motives. But that is beside the point. Armenia's request and the relief it seeks from this court is targeted at the protests as a whole, not the individual one-off acts of a select minority. And unless Armenia can show that these protests as a whole are, or at least plausibly, acts of racial discrimination, its case fails at the first hurdle. Neither do the protests have the effect of impairing protected rights. As I will address shortly, the protesters have not imposed any restrictions on civilian traffic along the Lachin Road, and there is extensive evidence of that. Before I move on, though, I want to make one brief remark on the issue of protests. Professor Boisson de Chazorn will address this point in her concluding speech. But at this stage, I just want to put down a marker and say that the relief Armenia seeks from the court should be seen for what it is: a request to order Azerbaijan to disperse and ban a peaceful protest, which amounts to asking this court to interfere with the fundamental right of Azerbaijani people to assemble and protest, a right guaranteed under international law and recognized in the CERD. I will now move to my second point, that there is no urgency necessitating the court's intervention. I will address it from two angles. First, what do we know about the impact of the protests? And second, what can be done, principally by Armenia, to resolve any issues without the necessity to involve the court on this already crowded space that is the Lachin Road? Well, when Armenia filed its request for provisional measures on 27 December, its key assertion was that there is a, quote, blockade, close quotes, of the Lachin Road. And I quote from the request, open quotes, preventing anyone and anything from entering or exiting, close quotes. Well, we know this statement is verifiably wrong. In your folder at tab 9, you have a collection of photographs which you can look at now that show traffic passing next to the protest site. Azerbaijan has also provided you with a selection of videos from various days of the protest showing passing traffic, which are listed in your folder at tab 10. We will now play one such video from the 12th of January. You can see a long line of supply trucks coming from the direction of Khankandi. The protesters are on the side of the road, allowing the trucks to pass with ease. You can also see the Russian peacekeepers in the background guarding this particular road checkpoint. And this is happening every day, several times a day. In addition to the videos listed at tab 10, other similar examples are referenced in Azerbaijan's earlier correspondence to court, which is at annexes 37 to 39. Well, this morning, Armenia's council quoted George Orwell, imploring you not to reject the evidence of your eyes and ears. Well, Azerbaijan can't agree more that it's the actual evidence, rather than Armenia's rhetoric, that the court needs to look at. And videos and photographs from the protest site show undeniably that Armenia's claims that the road is blocked are not true. And can we just look now at what is actually happening on the ground? First, Armenia claimed in its request that medical transfers have been rendered impossible. That was the substance of its initial request. That's wrong. As of yesterday, Armenian media have confirmed that at least 55 patients have been transported from Karabakh to Armenia since the start of the protests. The ICRC which has operated in Karabakh since early 1990s, has itself confirmed publicly on 18th of January this year that it had transported dozens of patients along the Lachin Road since 19th December. Indeed, there are countless videos from the protest site showing ICRC vehicles and Armenian ambulances passing freely through that area. And as the agent told you earlier, the ICRC facilitated a transfer of 19 people from Karabakh to Armenia just this present day. Contrary to Armenia's unsubstantiated assertion this morning, the ICRC does not engage in any negotiations with the protesters. The protesters simply stand to the side and the vehicles pass, as is clear from the video evidence at Annex 14. So, in summary, there is no indication in the evidence presented by Armenia, or otherwise available, that people requiring transfer to Armenia for medical treatment are at risk as a result of the protests. The repeated reference this morning to an unfortunate passing of an elderly local resident is not evidence that the person died as a result of the protests. In fact, ICRC medical transfers and Armenian ambulances were by that point coming through the protest site, and our agent confirmed that Azerbaijan has granted all ICRC requests for access. So the second issue is access to food, medicine and other essential supplies for those living in Karabakh. Well, the Russian peacekeepers are temporarily stationed in this region, so Azerbaijan does not have first-hand information about the situation on the ground. However, this is what is known. First, as we've seen in the video and can be confirmed from daily footage from the protest site, ICRC vehicles and all vehicles belonging to the Russian peacekeeping forces are passing freely on the Lachin Road next to the protest site. Secondly, it's common ground that food, medicine and other essential supplies are being delivered on those vehicles. For instance, Armenian media reported on 25th December that the ICRC delivered on that day food, supplies and medicine to Karabakh. The Russian Foreign Ministry confirmed on 12th January 2023 that, quotes, humanitarian convoys are now using the corridor, close quotes. And the Russian peacekeepers' daily briefings also confirmed the delivery of humanitarian supplies on a regular basis. ICRC have also confirmed that they had delivered medicine, baby formula and food supplies to Karabakh. That's what is known about the situation in Karabakh. But the key point is, if Armenia is saying, and I quote, there are shortages of certain foods or other basic supplies in Karabakh, as it did this morning, then those can be imported in the same way as they were before the protests started. There is no evidence before the court that there are any impediments on the Lachin Road to such traffic. The protesters have been very clear that they are not there to obstruct traffic. On 21st December 2022, they issued a statement in response to what they saw as an inaccurate portrayal of the situation in the Security Council debate the day before, and reaffirmed that humanitarian cargo, passenger vehicles, ambulances and other humanitarian vehicles can move freely along the road. So to summarise the second point, again, there is no indication in the evidence presented by Armenia or otherwise available that food, medicine and other basic supplies are not able to reach Karabakh as a result of the protests, still less as a result of any action of Azerbaijan. Now, Azerbaijan does not know why Armenia has stopped supplying the 400 tons of essential goods that it says it normally imports into Karabakh daily. But it's clear they're not being stopped by the protesters on Lachin Road or by Azerbaijan. For Armenia to say that, it would actually have to have shown that it tried, but was stopped from importing such product. And there is no evidence of that. Instead, Armenia is flatly refusing to engage, and I will return to that and what it means for their request shortly. But in summary, at this point, there is no evidence of urgency attributable to the activities of the protesters on the Lachin Road. And the same actually applies to other civilian traffic. Armenia has alleged that some Armenians living in Azerbaijan's Karabakh region, including children, have not been able to travel and that families remain separated. Well, if that's correct, and Azerbaijan has no means of verifying those claims, Azerbaijan does not know why that is the case. It is not aware of any transfers being organised but stopped. It's not received any communications from Armenia on this issue. To the contrary, as explained by the agent and confirmed by Armenia earlier today, there is video evidence of dozens of local residents having passed by the protest site since the start of the protests. All Armenia is offering as evidence of there being an immediate risk of irreparable harm is rhetoric, and that is easily refuted by evidence from the ground. It's certainly no basis for the court to order provisional measures against Azerbaijan. Well, today, Armenia has presented you a number of statements by international organisations which use the language of an impending humanitarian crisis. No doubt some of these statements reflect genuine concern about a situation that their authors have been told is critical. Some are mere political proclamations. However, none of these organisations have been on the ground at the protest site or in Karabakh to see what the protesters are and are not doing. And they've not seen the evidence, indeed, even presented to this court. In fact, we know that the statements were generally adopted without their authors having heard from Azerbaijan at all. During the UN Security Council debate on the 20th of December, the UN Assistant Secretary General for Europe, Central Asia and the Americas confirmed that the parties had presented very different versions of events, and that the UN, which does not have presence on the ground, open quotes, is not in a position to verify or confirm the situation, close quotes. In fact, I respectfully submit that what came across strongly this morning from Armenia's presentation is the absence of actual evidence for the allegations being made, as opposed to assertion upon assertion, often emotionally expressed. But if the court examines the actual evidence, you find the absence of key elements, the cherry-picking and selective quoting of statements, or no evidence at all. Let me just give some examples. As the agent already explained, the selective quoting from President Aliyev's statement on the 10th of January. The random collection of social media posts which are tied to the protests only by Armenia's rhetoric. Or the extraordinary accusation this morning that Azerbaijan threatened to shoot down any aircraft using the Karkandi airport, which was referred to as Stepankert. This statement is in fact from June 2011, and it only says that Azerbaijan's airspace is closed as a result of what was then an ongoing armed conflict. I'm not going to deal at any length with Armenia's late addition, this new request that Azerbaijan be ordered to, quotes, immediately fully restore and refrain from disrupting or impeding the provision of natural gas and other political public utilities in Karabakh, close quotes. Even though Armenia dedicated a substantial portion of its presentation today, this issue, we've yet to see any evidence either that Azerbaijan is deliberately disrupting gas supplies to Karabakh, which, just to be clear, is supplied from Armenia, or that there is ongoing disruption which would necessitate the court's intervention. Now, the agent for Azerbaijan provided an initial response in his speech, and in line with the court's invitation, we will defer further comment on this until after the conclusion of this oral hearing. But what is noteworthy is how much Armenia's case has shifted from its initial request. It started with allegations that medical transfers are impossible and that no food is getting through. Then, when Azerbaijan showed that ICRC vehicles, ambulances and Russian supply trucks were passing next to the protest site, Armenia said it's not enough. And when Armenia was faced with the evidence that any vehicle that approached the protest site was able to pass by, it has shifted its focus from the road to the alleged disruption of gas supply and other utilities. Madam President, members of the Court, I will address one final point, which alone means that there is no urgency necessitating the Court's intervention. Despite the protesters' assurances and evidence that traffic is passing next to the protest site, as the agent has already confirmed, from the outset, Azerbaijan has taken seriously the possible negative impact of the situation on its citizens in Karabakh. In the context of these proceedings, the key question for the Court is what can be done about it? There's only one meaningful answer, and that is cooperative action. The Lachin Road is a sovereign territory of Azerbaijan, but as agreed in the trilateral statement, it's temporarily under the control of the Russian peacekeepers, and it links the Armenians living in Karabakh to Armenia. Armenia says, for instance, that it uses the road to supply a large amount of essential food items to Karabakh on a daily basis. Any issue with traffic along the Lachin corridor therefore needs to be raised in the first instance with the Russian peacekeepers, and as the agent has confirmed, Azerbaijan is ready to and is in fact providing all necessary assistance. But Armenia also needs to do its part. This has been Azerbaijan's position throughout the protests, and the international community has also consistently called for dialogue among all stakeholders. Yet what has happened? On the 23rd of December 2022, 11 days into the protests, Armenia, Azerbaijan and the Russian Federation were due to hold tripartite talks in Moscow to progress discussions about a peace treaty, but also to address ongoing issues such as the Lachin Road protests. Yet at the last moment, without informing Russia, without informing Azerbaijan, who instead found out about it from a press release, Armenia decided to pull out of the meeting, citing at the time the, quotes, humanitarian crisis resulting from the illegal blockade of the Lachin corridor by Azerbaijan, close quotes. So, Armenia was quick to broadcast to the world its claim that there is a humanitarian crisis, but it walked away from negotiations that could address it. That is the opposite of constructive engagement. In fact, the Speaker of Armenia's National Assembly revealed the real reason behind Armenia's non-attendance in an interview on 17th January. He said that Armenia did not attend the 23rd December talks in Moscow because it did not want to be drawn into negotiations over a land corridor which would link mainland Azerbaijan with its exclave Nakhchivan through Armenia's territory, an issue which is intrinsically linked to the Lachin corridor. Effectively, Armenia is refusing to sit down to try to resolve what it calls the humanitarian crisis in Karabakh because of its own political interests. In fact, as you can see on the slide, on 10th January 2023, Armenia announced publicly that it would not negotiate with Azerbaijan on the Lachin Road issues, which should instead be taken up by the so-called authorities, in quotes, in Karabakh. Here, of course, Armenia is referring to its installed regime, the remnants of which are still stationed in Azerbaijan's territory. Now, those statements are in your folders at tabs 11 and 12. So why is Armenia asking the court to urgently intervene when Armenia itself is not willing to? Where is the necessity of handing this question to the court? And here I echo my colleague, Mr. Lowe's submission to the court. Despite, though, Armenia's refusal to engage with the situation, Armenia made one more attempt to facilitate the flow of traffic along the Lachin Road. In its letter to the court on 12th January, which you will find in your folders at tab 16, it called upon Armenia to provide information about food, medical and other civilian supplies which it wished to deliver to Karabakh, designate companies which will perform the deliveries and also share information about any required transfer of persons. Upon the provision of such information, Azerbaijan was prepared to engage bilaterally with the Russian Federation to encourage them to permit these transfers without any restrictions. But there was no response from Armenia, and that, we suggest, speaks for itself. Of course, it's always been open to Armenia to raise any issues directly with the Russian peacekeepers, but to Azerbaijan's knowledge, it has not done so. And the Russian Federation has confirmed on several recent occasions that it's Armenia's refusal to engage, its attempts to politicize the issue, that are preventing progress in the talks. How then can Armenia stand here today and say that the situation urgently requires the court to intervene? So the difference between Azerbaijan's and Armenia's approaches in the last few weeks has been stark. Armenia is unwilling to lift a finger to help, but it's first off the line to proclaim that there's an impending humanitarian catastrophe caused by Azerbaijan. As the agent explained, the situation suits Armenia because it's an opportunity to rally the world behind it, to issue statements which attract public attention and understandably elicit concerns among the international community. As the agent already stated, it's particularly concerning that, that Armenia has been accusing Azerbaijan of ethnic cleansing and genocide without a shred of evidence, just to drum up international support. Earlier this month, Armenia's foreign minister said to the OSCE Permanent Council, and I quote, "We cannot stand by and watch how people are slowly starving to death because of political games and perhaps geopolitical considerations. The time to act is now," close quotes. Yet Armenia is doing the exact opposite. It is refusing to act. And as things stand, it is Armenia who is the obstacle to the resolution of any remaining issues concerning civilian traffic along the Lachin Road and the situation of people living in Karabakh. As the agent for the Republic explained earlier, and you can see that on this slide, Azerbaijan, on the other hand, has been not only willing to engage from the outset, but to back up its statements with real actions. It's been in communication with the ICRC throughout, has met with local residents, offered to address any humanitarian concerns they may have, and continued to engage with the Russian peacekeepers to facilitate the flow of traffic on the Lachin Road. And you have the details there on the slide before you. So, Madam President, members of the court needs to ask itself, based on the evidence before it, what and who is the real problem here? The evidence points undeniably towards Armenia. Madam President, members of the court, it's been an honour to appear before you. I thank you for your kind attention, and I invite the court now to call Professor Boisson de Chazourne.
I thank Lord Goldsmith for his statement, and I now invite Professor Laurence Boisson de Chazourne to take the floor.
Madam President, distinguished members of the court, it's a great honour for me to appear before you once again on behalf of the Republic of Azerbaijan. This afternoon, there are 2 points that I'm going to raise. First of all, I shall deal with the reasons for which Armenia's application does not meet the requirements concerning indication of provisional measures and as such must be dismissed. I will then go into the matter of the severe harm that would occur if the measures requested by Armenia were to be granted, and this from the point of view of the protesters and from the point of view of third countries. Distinguished members of the court, Armenia's demand is not founded on real urgency or a risk of severe prejudice such as to justify provisional measures. In reality, Armenia has presented false information and has made use of language that was quite simply sensationalist and incendiary, linked to the notions of ethnic cleansing as a pretext to appear here before the court, as demonstrated by Azerbaijan this afternoon. The purpose of this application is to serve the interests of the political agenda of Armenia, both at domestic level and internationally. However, these abusive maneuverings at political level cannot conceal the fact that Armenia's request does not meet the criteria concerning indication of provisional measures as established by the court's jurisprudence. First of all, Armenia relies on no plausible right under the International Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination, the CERD, and as explained by Lord Goldsmith, this is a threshold matter. Absent a plausible case of racial discrimination, the court cannot order provisional measures. In this case, a peaceful pro-environment demonstration cannot be qualified as racial discrimination without there being any credible evidence of restriction or some form of blockade along the Lachin Road that would allegedly be attributed to Azerbaijan. It is true that at this stage the court does not have to rule definitively on the merits of the Armenian application under CERD. However, this does not mean that Armenia does not have to present prima facie a credible case for racial discrimination. As demonstrated by Lord Goldsmith, Armenia at this stage has not provided any credible evidence for racial discrimination, whether it's to do with the supposed obstruction of the Lachin Road or the recent allegations made by Armenia concerning the supply of gas and other public utilities. Secondly, clearly there is no nexus between the measures sought by Armenia and the rights that it is allegedly seeking to protect. According to the jurisprudence of the court, the measures sought must specifically target the preservation of the rights in the case before this court. In other terms, the court must be convinced that the measures sought are adapted to the protection of the rights at issue. In this instance, the two provisional measures sought by Armenia do not meet this test. The first measure sought by Armenia, according to which Azerbaijan should, and I cite, cease its orchestration and support of the alleged protests blocking uninterrupted free movement, is baseless. As demonstrated by the photographs and video footage submitted as evidence to the court, the peaceful demonstration by the side of the road, which serves to denounce both the illegal exploitation by Armenia of mines and the degradation of the environment caused in Azerbaijan, does not block the road. So this measure sought vis-à-vis Azerbaijan is ineffectual, will be ineffectual, in the sense that Azerbaijan and the protesters there are in no way blocking the movement of traffic. Similarly, the second measure sought by Armenia, in other words, and I quote, Azerbaijan shall ensure uninterrupted free movement of all persons, vehicles and cargo along the Lachin corridor in both directions, is inappropriate in that it is not addressed to the right party. As explained by the agent for the Republic of Azerbaijan, the Lachin corridor is under the control of the Russian peacekeeping forces. In this regard, Azerbaijan has taken no measure that could endanger movement. On the contrary, Azerbaijan has done everything it could to make sure that movement down the Lachin corridor remains safe and secure, while at the same time maintaining contact with the Russian authorities' commanders who are deployed on the ground. At this stage, there is nothing more that Azerbaijan could reasonably do in order to control and secure traffic down the Lachin corridor. Azerbaijan currently does not control the Lachin corridor. Madam President, One might indeed ask in what way the provisional measures sought are designed to protect the rights invoked by the Armenians, whereas in fact there's no restriction on the exercising of said rights. It's not enough to say that a right exists. Armenia has also to demonstrate that there is a case of racial discrimination prima facie under the CERD. Given that Armenia's application has no material effect on the exercise of Armenians' rights, the measures, quite simply, are in response to an unrealistic fear that the rights under the CERD may perhaps be compromised. Indication of such measures would be futile and would mean that the court would be issuing an order with no real purpose or practical effect. On this point, the jurisprudence of your court is clear. The court does not indicate provisional measures if these are not applicable. As a result, the provisional measures sought are quite simply and clearly inappropriate in this instance. Then Armenia has not satisfied the essential requirement of urgency. I'm certainly not going to repeat the arguments put forward by Lord Goldsmith. I will, however, make a number of additional observations. It is difficult to understand how Armenia can state that its current request is urgent, whereas similar measures have already been adopted by the European Court for Human Rights in December of last year in a context that is very similar to that before us today. The agent for the Republic of Azerbaijan, Mr. Elnur Mammadov, has just reiterated the undertakings of his state in this regard. What is more, evidence on the ground shows that there is a lack of urgency. The International Committee of the Red Cross has confirmed its assistance as regards medical transfers and humanitarian supplies, which has also been acknowledged by Armenian media. The Russian peacekeeping forces have confirmed that the humanitarian convoys were using the road, and dozens of local residents were able to return from Armenia to Karabakh. There are a number of video recordings, as well as other evidence, that demonstrate that it is possible to move through the Lachin corridor at the place where the demonstration is organized. There's been no blocking of the traffic. In this context, the matter of urgency, the threshold, is not met. Distinguished members of the court, for its application to succeed, Armenia would have had to have provided credible proof demonstrating each of the following. First of all, that Azerbaijan orchestrated and is responsible for the environmental demonstration down Lachin Road. Secondly, that the demonstration really does block the road or severely impede the flow of traffic along that road. Thirdly, that if the traffic is blocked, the intention or the effect was racial discrimination. Fourthly, that the consequences of the restrictions were such that there is now a real risk of irreparable harm. Fifthly, the measures sought are designed to remedy the situation of the Lachin corridor and are liable to do so. For the different reasons that the court has heard today, Armenia's request does not meet any of these conditions. Therefore, Madam President, Armenia's request must be dismissed. This brings me now to the second part of my submissions on irreparable damage that allegedly would be caused if the measures requested were to be indicated. Article 41 of the Statute of your court specifies that your court shall have the power to indicate, if it considers that circumstances so require, any provisional measures which ought to be taken to preserve the respective rights of either party. In granting provisional measures, the court must take account of the rights of the opposing party and those of third states. One of the reasons for this is to do with the exceptional nature of its jurisdiction in matters of provisional measures. In this case, the measures sought by Armenia did not take account of the rights and interests of other parties. If the measures being sought by Armenia were to be granted, that would be severely detrimental to the rights and obligations of other parties affected. A damage that would broadly supersede any objective that the measures are claiming to reach. Madam President, Armenia is asking the court to force Azerbaijan to hamper the fundamental rights of its citizens as regards taking part in peaceful demonstrations. This is to be seen clearly in paragraph 19 of the application, in which Armenia complains at Azerbaijan's failure to disperse the protesters. The court is asked to order Azerbaijan to make use of its criminal code and take the repressive measures available to it against a perfectly legal demonstration. This request by Armenia is neither reasonable nor proportional. On the contrary, with all due respect to Armenia, Azerbaijan must, under domestic and international law, respect and protect the fundamental rights of citizens as regards their taking part in peaceful demonstrations. Indeed, the right to demonstrate is guaranteed by numerous human rights instruments at international and domestic level: rights to freedom of expression, freedom of thought, freedom of conscience, and freedom of assembly. These fundamental rights may not be revoked without there being a legal justification. And even if the demonstration had perhaps slightly hampered traffic, which, as explained by the agent for Azerbaijan, is not the case, any such hindrance would not be an adequate legal justification for the repression of such demonstration. Under international law, the banning or dispersal of an assembly can only be considered as a last resort. General restrictions, such as those sought by Armenia, are, as a matter of principle, disproportionate. Without an iota of evidence, Armenia is accusing Azerbaijan of orchestrating and financially supporting the demonstration. However, as Lord Goldsmith has said, that is not the case. What is more, any restriction must be determined by the law. The demonstration on the road, the Lachin road, is not a disturbance of public order. It does not impede nor restrict the movement of humanitarian aid, nor the movement of local residents going from Armenia to Karabakh. Traffic along the Lachin corridor is not blocked, as noted by the Committee for Human Rights of the United Nations in its general observation on the right to peaceful assembly, and I quote, "The mere fact of pushing or shoving or disturbing the movement of vehicles or pedestrians or daily activities does not constitute violence." The committee also observed that the extent or the nature of public assemblies, and I quote once again, may cause disturbances, for example, hindering the movement of vehicles or pedestrians or hampering economic activity. Whether these consequences are intentional or not intentional, in no way do they call into question the protection that such assemblies should enjoy. End of quotation. Armenia has not demonstrated the existence of a legal foundation which would allow Azerbaijan to, or whereby Azerbaijan would have to curtail the rights of the Azerbaijani protesters. A proportionate approach would mean that Armenia would establish contact with the Federation of Russia and set up a system of cooperation in order to ensure the flow of goods and persons along the Lachin corridor. However, Armenia has refused to establish contact with the Russian Federation, and without notice and without appropriate justification, it pulled out of the trilateral discussions that should have been held with a view, inter alia, to solving the situation of the Lachin corridor. Instead of adopting a reasonable and proportionate approach, Armenia has chosen to come before your court and to request provisional measures to be ordered aimed at preventing people's right to demonstrate. As I've already mentioned, in examining a request for provisional measures, the court must inter alia take account of the irreparable damage that might be caused to the rights of the opposing party. In view of the fundamental nature of the rights at issue in this case, the court should make sure that the rights of natural persons should in no way be hampered through the exercise of its jurisdiction. By contributing to upholding international law, in so doing, the court cannot order that the rights of individuals in Azerbaijan or elsewhere would not be respected. That is indeed what would happen if you were to accede to Armenia's request. There's another important point as regards prejudice that is worth noting. Azerbaijan upholds that it would be inappropriate for the court to grant Armenia's request if that meant that the court were determining the rights and interests of a third state that is not appearing before this court. That would not be compatible with the proper administration of justice, indeed with the judicial function of the court. Although the Russian Federation is not a party to these proceedings, it does nonetheless play a central role in the dispute. Article 6 of the trilateral statement provides that the Lachin corridor remains under the control of the Russian Federation peacekeeping forces. And there is no dispute as to the fact that the Russian peacekeeping forces do exert real control on the ground. What is more, as explained by Mr. Lowe, it's the Russian Federation that is really responsible for the management and the limiting of movement along Lachin corridor. As Armenia is asking the court to order the uninterrupted free movement of all persons, vehicles and cargo along the Lachin corridor, this cannot be done without issuing an instruction to Russia, which is in control of the Lachin corridor. Similarly, it is impossible to ask questions about the behavior of Azerbaijan without first of all understanding the position of Russia in the context of the trilateral statement and its conduct throughout the length of the Lachin corridor. A court order dealing with the situation in the Lachin corridor would run the risk of amending or reinterpreting the special regime of the corridor as agreed by Armenia, Azerbaijan, and the Russian Federation in the trilateral statement. The very fact that Armenia's request involves the obligations of a third state is an insurmountable obstacle to an order for provisional measures. The court cannot change the balance between the obligations agreed on by three states in the context of a bilateral dispute. In the past, the court clearly indicated, and I quote, that it may, for the preservation of those rights, indicate provisional measures to be taken by the parties, but not by third states or other entities who would not be bound by the eventual judgment to recognize and respect those rights. End of quotation. Madam President, distinguished members of the court, the provisional measures sought in this instance are inappropriate and futile. The real motivation of Armenia is not so much to protect the rights underserved against irreparable damage, but rather to make use of these proceedings before this distinguished court, using it as a platform to further its own grievances the application by Armenia does not meet any of the required legal criteria as regards the provisional measures. None of the legal criteria required for provisional measures are met. On the contrary, there is a risk of there being an additional substantial prejudice caused to the rights and interests of persons and states not called upon to appear before the court. In these circumstances, Armenia's request must be dismissed. Madam President, distinguished members of the court, this concludes my submissions. And Madam President, I would ask you to give the floor to Elnur Mammadov, agent for the Republic of Azerbaijan.
I thank Professor Bosan-Deshajor, and I now invite the agent of Azerbaijan, His Excellency Mr. Elnur Mammadov, to address the floor. You have the floor, Excellency.
Madam President, honorable members of the court, it is my privilege to address you once again and to close the submissions by the Republic of Azerbaijan. My country emphasizes its great respect for the court and its continued commitment to fulfill its obligations under the third and the trilateral statement. I want to take the opportunity to thank the Office of the Registrar and the interpreters for their tremendous work during these proceedings. The Republic of Azerbaijan makes the following final submissions. In accordance with Article 62 of the Rules of Court, for the reasons explained during these hearings, the Republic of Azerbaijan respectfully asks the Court to reject the request for the indication of provisional measures submitted by the Republic of Armenia. Madam President, honorable members of the Court, I thank you for your kind attention.
I thank the agent of Azerbaijan, whose statement brings to an end the single round of oral argument of Azerbaijan, as well as the present series of sittings. In accordance with the usual practice, I shall request both agents to remain at the court's disposal to provide any additional information the court may require. The court will render its order on the request for indication of provisional measures submitted by Armenia as soon as possible. The agents of the parties will be advised in due course as to the date on which the court will deliver the order in a public sitting. Since the court has no other business before it today, the sitting is declared closed.